Hey everyone, welcome back to the course. In the last video, you were introduced to JavaScript, the programming language that runs the web. In this video, we will start working with some basic JavaScript concepts, mainly variables and math. Therefore, let's get right to it. If you're taking or already took algebra, you should already be familiar with the concepts of variables. In math, variables are like placeholders to represent different values. In the example 2 plus x equals 4, we can solve for x to know that it is equal to 2. Therefore, x represents the number 2. Knowing that, we could also write, for example, 3 plus x and know that that would be equal to 5. Since x equals 2, we could rewrite it as 3 plus 2, which equals 5. In JavaScript, we use variables to store data, and this gives us the ability to reuse it wherever we want in our code. Let's look at an example in CodePen, and the link can be found right above this lesson if you want to follow along. Back then, the standard was to use the var keyword, meaning variable, giving it a name and making it equal to something. So for example, var x equals 2. Now, x will always be equal to 2 anytime we use it in our app. Therefore, if I made another variable, let's say num, short for number, and said x plus 3, the variable num will be equal to 5 because x is equal to 2, so we can rewrite this as 2 plus 3, which equals 5. We can check it with a simple console.log num, and you can see that 5 is printed right here. We'll explain this more later on, but for now, it's just to show how variables work. But variables don't have to be just numbers. They can be strings or words, booleans, which is simply true or false, or arrays, which we'll talk about in later lessons. However, as JavaScript developed, the var keyword became outdated as developers adopted a new convention of creating variables. There are two types of variables you can create, let and const. Let variables are variables that you intend to change in the future. For example, if we made a variable total price, tracking the price of a shopping cart in an online store, for example, we can predict that the total price will most likely not stay the same as people add or maybe remove stuff from their carts. So we would use a let. Notice how I named the variable. This type of naming is called camel case, where the first word starts with a lowercase, and every word following that starts with an uppercase. This is the most common way to name variables in JavaScript, and the style you'll likely see almost everywhere. Note that variable names have specific rules. For example, they can't start with a number, have any weird characters, or anything like that. So this could be equal to, for example, 3, but then later on, we can change it to 4. And let's see what the result is. As you can see, the console outputs 4. However, if we wanted variables where the values wouldn't change, we would use a const or constant. If I created a variable my birthday year and set it as 2007, I would most likely want to use const, as unfortunately I cannot change the year I was born in. However, if I had a variable called my age and set it equal to 17, I'd most likely want to use let, as I know that value will eventually change. Now that you know the basics of variables, we can start playing around with them using math. And you saw me doing that a little earlier on. Thankfully, math in programming works pretty similarly to how it works in real life. A good way for us to check math is using JavaScript's built-in method, console.log, like you saw me use earlier, which basically just displays our output to the console. So anything that we put in these parentheses will be logged to the console. Like this. Let's go through the arithmetic operators, or the different math symbols you can use in JavaScript. So obviously we have our standard addition, subtraction, multiplication, in which we use an asterisk, division, which we use a slash, and then a brand new one called modulo, or remainder division, and we'll explain that in a little bit. So these four work as you would expect, but what about this modulo operator? Modulo is the remainder of division. So if we had 15 donuts, but only 10 classmates, the modulo operator would result in 5 because there would be 5 leftover donuts. We also have the exponentiation, with 2 asterisks. So this is saying a number to the power of, and then the power. So if we wanted 2 squared, or 2 to the power of 2, we would do 2 exponentiation 2, which would equal 4. If we did 2 exponentiation 3, we would get 8. There's also increment and decrement, which increase or decrease the value of a variable by 1. And these are shown by plus plus and minus minus. So if we add let x equals 1, and then x plus plus, this would be an increment. And if we console logged it, we would get a 2. All right, this was a quick overview of variables and math in JavaScript. I hope you were able to follow along smoothly, and definitely be sure to play around with the new concepts that you learned. That's all for me today, and I'll see you in the next lesson.